Mavi Ekonomi başlıklı bir Keynote speech'imiz olacak. Bu Keynote speech'i verecek isim de Giora İsrail LLC Başkanı Sayın Giora İsrail geliyor. Are you going to use this microphone?
Floating around.
Okay, that's even better. Thank you very much. The stage is yours, sir.
Good morning. My name is Giora, and I'm here today to, is the slide coming up? Yeah. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the blue economy. I'm coming from the cruise industry, and I'll focus on the cruise industry, but I want to talk about a little bit the blue economy and to give you some ideas how important the blue economy is and some of the more interesting things that can happen around the blue economy. So thank you. My presentation is divided into certain sections. The first section is to recognize a very dear friend who is not with us anymore. An introduction of the cruise industry, just that you know what it is. And then I want to provoke you on a subject to do with the blue economy. And finally, I want to leave you with 5 ideas that maybe make the great Turkey as a destination even greater than it is today, much greater, although it's great already. So the first thing I want to tell you is about my late dear friend, who is not long anymore with us. He was one of the greatest leaders of the cruise industry in your country, I want you to know. And I cannot say enough about his contribution to the cruise industry in your country. For many, many years, and I know him for decades, unfortunately he cannot be with us anymore. But he left a great legacy with his daughter and his son Kamal. And so I'm so honored. I want you to look at the slide, not of me, which was 16 years ago, and I was much younger, but to the fact that he organized a conference here, an international conference, the first sea trade conference in any single country, in your country. And what he wanted to talk about 16 years ago is Winter Cruising Forum. He understood what was just said in the earlier panel, that we need to stretch the season, we need to stretch the year. So I'm really dedicating my speech today to the memory of my dear friend. Thank you. I flew out of Miami Friday night on Turkish Airways. I love Turkish Airways, great service, amazing. And before I left, I took a picture from my condo pool deck of the Port of Miami. That was around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There were 9 ships in the port. And these 9 ships had a capacity of 35,000 passengers. By the way, in home port, you count passenger twice because you count passenger movement. It basically means that Miami had 70,000 passenger movement on that day, just to show you the strength and the magnitude of the cruise industry. Miami is the biggest, but there are many other great big ports around the world. If you look at the total number of passengers on that day, Saturday, just in 3 ports in South Florida, the capacity was 63,000 passenger movements at 100% occupancy. When you consider the cruise industry operates at around 110, 115% occupancy, these are amazing numbers. But another fascinating number is the one that I circled in this red circle, and that is the number of lower berth beds, if you will, that Carnival Corporation, the largest cruise line in the world, had on the day I joined the company. So just these 4 ships had the entire capacity of the cruise industry's largest company in 1992, early 92 when I joined. And it's quite amazing how this industry grew so much, so amazingly. By the way, half of that number is equal to Europe's largest cruise line at that time, which was called Eperiotiki, which was a Greek cruise line that Carnival acquired 50% of, and I moved to Greece in 1992. They were then the largest cruise company in Europe with only half the capacity of these just 4 vessels. That's when I fell in love with your country and coming very frequently to Crusada Sea, to Istanbul, and so on. But this is just a flash into the situation. When we look at tourism numbers, and by the way, these are numbers from the United Nations Tourism Organization, so they are excluding overnight, and you think, how big is the cruise industry compared to tourism in general? Because cruising is just an element of the overall tourism industry. We're a tiny little element. So Turkey had 60 million. I know there's 62 million number as well being spoken. These are without day visitors, so we have about 60 million. US has 73 million. By the way, Turkey was number 4 in the world in 2025, as you well know, which is quite extraordinary. But you have a long way to go to become number 1, but you will be there soon, I hope, I'm sure. Spain had 85 million. Italy, 57, France, 90. And the question to you is not a test. How many passengers went on all the cruise line, on all the ships from all the home ports? Cruise industry is going to 1,150 ports around the world. So the entire amount of tourists in all these ports, in all these ships, on all these cruise lines is just a small, very small number of 36 million. So the cruise industry, when you look at the ship, it's big. When you look at the industry, it's very small. We're only a fraction of the holiday vacation business in the world. And that's why we will still continue to grow for decades ahead of us. The industry is very concentrated. There are basically 4 companies: Royal Caribbean Group, Carnival Group, NCL Group, and MSC, which has 2 brands as well. And these 4 companies have between them several brands and several ships. Some of the interesting things here that you can see that around 80% of the world capacity is in the hands of these 4 groups. Yet there are 102 brands around the world. 82% of the brands of the world are not part of the top 4 companies in the world, because there are many brands that have 1 ship or 2 ships or small expedition ships. So it's a very interesting statistics to understand this business. When you look at the bottom numbers that I added, that 50% of the ships are not part of the 4 biggest company, but yet 82% of the capacity belongs to these 4 companies. So it's very, very interesting how this interesting company is. We are dividing ourselves into these 4 major categories: contemporary, premium, budget, and luxury, and all the rest. So you can see that the contemporary, these big ships, that today they're ships of 7,500 passengers and about 2,500 crew. So ships that carry 10,000 lives. And there are many ships of 6,600 and so on. That's the contemporary. Then premium, budget, which is kind of a unique kind of a segment, usually owned by large UK or German tour operators. And then you have the luxury market that is growing. We'll talk about it more. Where we operate, different parts of the world, Caribbean is still very, very strong because of the proximity to the US, and in the winter to the appeal for Europeans. Let's look at what the contemporary, and I'm giving you some examples quickly. By the way, the ship on the top is today the world's largest ship that can carry 7,500 passengers or 10,000 people on board at any given time. Carnival, MSC, you know, these are the brands, not the companies. Then there are contemporary but branded. So I start from the bottom. It's Virgin. You heard about Virgin, Richard Branson, Virgin Air. They have a cruise line now. Then you have Disney, Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse has its own cruise line. But the one on the top that you don't know a lot of here in Europe is called Margaritaville. And what is this brand called Margaritaville? It's a name of a song by a famous American singer. But even a song can create a cruise line. The next one are contemporary national brands. Brands that carry people usually from either one nationality or one language. So we have TUI, this is a German cruise line, Costa, Italian, P&O, British. So it's British in English, but it's not English for American. It's very British. Then you have the luxury brands. Viking, and we'll hear more about Viking in a minute, which doesn't like to call itself luxury, but let me tell you, it's a first-class, very fantastic cruise company. Silver Sea, which is a part of the Royal Caribbean Group, and Seabourn, part of the Carnival Corporation. What we now have, and we'll hear more about Ritz-Carlton in a minute, that hotel brands and even the train brands owned by a hotel wants to become a cruise line, which is extraordinary. And the cruise industry welcomes those in it. So we will hear more a little bit about Ritz-Carlton. Spiros is here to tell us more. We have the Four Seasons that will start later this year to operate. And finally, we have the Orient Express. It's just a train ride from London to Venice and maybe to Istanbul, and that will also start. It's an Accord group. We welcome, the cruise industry wants diversity of enterprise. And finally, we have the expeditions. These are small ships that are operating all around the world, North Pole, South Pole, up the rivers, up to the Amazon. And it's a very interesting, fascinating, and growing segment of the industry. What is also interesting that we have national owned by government or governmental agency cruise line, Adora, which is the first large Chinese cruise company that just started operating. And very interesting, and if I would have told it to you 10 years ago that Saudi Arabia will have a cruise line, you would have laughed at me, but here we are. We have Saudi Arabia with its own. They have now two cruise companies. Arroya is one of them, and they came to Turkey last year, by the way. So nationally, government-owned cruise line is not new. The specialist in government-owned cruise line was actually the former East Bloc. East Germany had a cruise line, Poland has a cruise line, and Russia, Soviet Union, had a cruise line. They don't have them anymore, but it's very interesting to note that. What drives the cruise line compared to the hotels? I know there are a lot of hotel people here around us today because you have a huge hotel industry in your country. What drives us to the business and away from it are these four factors: geopolitical opportunities and challenges, economical opportunity and challenges. And you don't have to read all of that. But basically, this is what we mean when we have a geopolitical challenges to operate to or from a certain country, opportunity, challenges, and economical opportunity and challenges. And where do we live? We live exactly in the middle of it. Because we, unlike hotels that can't move, we can move. So if there's a geopolitical situation in one part of the world, we take the ships from here and take them there. And if there's an economical opportunity to go back to Brazil because the economy is up, that's where we go to. This gives the cruise line extraordinary ability to operate year-round and overcome economical and geopolitical challenges, because those unfortunately exists as challenges and opportunity always come around when the economy is turned. Now I'm coming to an important part. It's the blue economy. Why is the blue economy a subject on the agenda today? The blue economy has to do with everything of the sea and about the sea. Why is it important for Turkey? Think about it. Your coastline is 8,333 kilometers. I didn't measure it, but I studied it. Think about it. You have more waterline than Germany, than France, than Holland and Belgium and Portugal together. Together. That means that the ocean and the water is very, very important to you in so many aspects. I only have 2 hours to talk about it, so I cannot talk about it all. But I want to touch on one little thing that is very important that many people have not heard about it. But for that, I have to take you back to the future. For thousands of years, we used only 4 methods of power or energy to propel things, mainly at sea, for example. We use gravity to take water, or gravity to take products on rivers down the river. We used animals to carry things alongside rivers or canals. We used the wind for sail we use manpower for rowing on ships. We did so for thousands of years. Think about it, that we're using the water as a method for transport much before we invented the wheel. We're actually operating and carrying people and merchandise on ships for 10,000 years. This is, by the way, a canoe that was found in Holland, which is 8,000 years old. And there's another vessel in Senegal that was found that is also about 8,500 years old. The wheel was invented much longer. We were there using the oceans, the rivers, the lakes for transportation of people and products forever. Today, 85% of commercial physical products are moving around the world. World commerce is done by sea. So the sea is critically important and remain critically important. 85% of the global commerce. So what happened? So 8,000 BC, we invented the transportation of people and merchandise on the water, and we had to wait until 1766, where the Scottish gentleman called James Watt invented the steam engine. It was actually a Frenchman who took a small, tiny little steam engine and put it on a small boat in 1783. He did so on a boat that was only 4 meters long. But that was the first time that a vessel on water, on lake, on river, on ocean, operated on a non-human rose or wind, which was extraordinary. As you know, the steam engine created the Industrial Revolution and helped propel global commerce. One of the tests, whether you want to fly or take a ship, is actually crossing the Atlantic. In 1819, for the first time, a ship was able to cross the Atlantic from the US to the UK. It was only 30 meters long, very small vessel. They had sails because they were not sure they can make it. But they came non-stop without ever using their sails from the US to Europe. It was the first time a ship crossed the Atlantic on non-wind power. That was a beginning of a change in transportation and commerce, major change. It took 200 years from that point, 1818, where the first ship used a steel engine, to the most advanced fuel we currently use at sea, which is LNG. It took 200 years to get from coal to LNG. The cruise lines, like Carnival Cruise Line, the first cruise line were actually transportation vessels, and they have used heavy fuels. And still, Carnival started by using these old ships, steam ships with heavy fuels, until we got in 2018 with these big ships on LNG. So let me take you again back to the future. Already in 2018, but I have to take you back a little bit. This is Dwight Eisenhower. He was the president of the United States. He was a 5-star general and was part of the commander of the Allied forces that ended the Second World War. He became president in 1953. And this man, who was responsible to throw the 2 bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, said to himself, we should never, ever use nuclear power to kill or to see bloodshed again. Remember, only people who saw blood don't want to see it again. So on December 7, when he was 11 months already the president, he decided to come to the United Nations, and December 7 is the day Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese in 1940 that caused the Americans to join the war. And he said, I want to introduce the world with atoms for peace. And he gave a speech in the United Nations of over 2 hours where he said, the United States now wants to give a gift of peace and energy to the whole world. Nuclear reactors were then exported to Germany, to the UK, to France, to Japan. Japan was just an enemy of the US. But he thought that nuclear power should be used for peace, for the well-being of people. So it was the vision of that soldier, ex-soldier, become president. In order to tell this story to the world, he gave instruction to build a nuclear-powered cargo and passenger ship. The people didn't want to do it. The military didn't want to allow it. Nuclear power was new. We just threw the bomb on Hiroshima. How do we take nuclear power and do anything that moves on a vessel? But he was the president, and he worked very hard. It took him a few years. And guess what? In 1959, the first ship, commercial ship, was built. It called the Savannah. Of course it was called the Savannah. It was the Savannah who crossed the Atlantic for the first time on coal power. Let be this new ship called the Savannah. And she carried 66 passengers in 18 luxury suites and 8,000 tons. That ship operated for 11 years around the world, went to 177 ports to demonstrate and to have cocktail parties and reception in ports around the world, to demonstrate what nuclear power can be. This is a picture of the ship arriving in San Francisco. When I tell this story, 99% of the people who hear that story have never heard about it. But it is a fact. That is the ship. This is me on the bridge of that ship only about a year ago. This ship exists. The ship is in the port of Baltimore and is looking for a home as a museum to tell that story of the first nuclear ship. And here I'm sitting in one of the bars. This gentleman there is a former cadet on the ship. They restored the ship. They took the nuclear reactor out, and they allowed me to visit the ship. I'm actually advising the US government to find a home for that ship. This is the dining room, and I'm sitting here, and the blue arrow actually shows the wall. And 40 centimeters of this wall, behind that wall, was the nuclear reactor. And there was no problem. And that was technology of 1955. So it's fascinating. This cubicle of wood, which is on the entrance to the ship, 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter by 5 centimeters, provided enough energy in the technology of 1955 to propel that ship 12 times around the globe. That means 7 100,000-ton gallons of diesel fuel is 1 cube, 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter. What was the end of this experiment? Unfortunately, as the ships started sailing around the world, the Russians developed their own nuclear power, and nuclear became toxic. And we couldn't talk about nuclear. And we haven't talked about nuclear for decades. It was kind of under the carpet because nuclear is a bomb, nuclear is dangerous, nuclear is waste. But guess what? Why am I involved in nuclear? I'm not a nuclear scientist. In my job in Carnival was to develop destination and ports, and to develop them where we can go slow with the ships so we don't burn a lot of fuels. By the way, this is one of my ports that I'm very proud of in Dubai Harbor. I realized that perhaps building ports close is not the answer. Getting the ships further is the answer. And the only way to get it without pollution is modern nuclear power. So I had to wait until one day in late 2022, and then in 23, my telephone have 5 apps that needed nuclear power. AI came to this world, and we have Facebook and Amazon and Google that suddenly needed nuclear power because we don't have enough power to paint pictures on AI. And that led to a new development in nuclear power. One of the more fascinating things in the involvement of these 2 fine gentlemen, one from the Gulf and one from the US, the founder of Microsoft, to develop a new generation of nuclear power, which actually is using the waste of the old nuclear reactors. They didn't know what to do with waste. And they're going to build a nuclear reactor, which is not bigger than a 20-foot container by the end of this decade. There are 7 different new technology of nuclear reactor that will have no waste. some of them are in the size of a small bus. So we see extraordinary things, and the push for that came from the AI in the last 3 years. Immediately, Lloyd's Register, the Korean, everybody is suddenly looking at the maritime industry. And believe it or not, even small reactor in the size of a little Mini Cooper into private yachts as a nuclear reactor. Believe it or not, it's not fantasy. So we are ushering into a new area. And there's no reason why a country like Turkey cannot get involved in this as well. This report was issued 10 days ago by DNV, the largest classification society probably in the world, about nuclear power in the maritime industry. So this is coming, and coming soon. This is my favorite solution, which, by the way, will have no refueling. This nuclear reactor, which is now being tested, will not require refueling of the engine or the ship or whatever it is for at least 300 years. I know it's science fiction, but it is actual science. I told you the last thing I want to tell you, and that will be end. I hope I'm coming to the end. The last slide, and here it goes. The 5 things. We need more capacity for Istanbul. Turnaround ships in Istanbul bring a lot of economical impact, including for the airline, including for the hotels in Turkey and the tours and the excursions. Number 2, we need more ports and more large berths in more ports in Turkey. Absolutely, the industry can grow 5, 6, 10 times from what it is today. We need to study airlift constraint, and you say, Giora, Turkish Airways, one of the greatest, best airlines in the world, why do we have constraint? And I don't have the time to explain, but I'll be happy if anybody wants to discuss this with me. We also need to study the Santorini predicament and what it means. Don't only promote Istanbul, promote every single aspect of your country. There is much more to Turkey than just Istanbul, although Istanbul is the most magical city there is. And finally, the Black Sea. Let's not forget the Black Sea. Turkey should own the Black Sea. These are the cruise ports in the Black Sea. And like the Berlin Wall came down, the war between Ukraine and Russia will come down very soon. And I know your government is involved in trying to bring this war to an end. But the Black Sea is also essential type of cruising that can be based here. That's all I had to say. I leave you with this one thought, that legacy is a state of mind. It's not companies or technology. Legacy is a state of mind. Thank you.